start recording. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome friends, whether you're joining us online or you're here live at American Heritage School, American Fork. It's great to have you today. I'm really excited for today's class. I feel like we have some very, very substantial and inspiring things to talk about from the life of the prophet Joseph Smith. And I'm excited for the reasoning and relating that we'll do together. Edification is at least a two-way process, so please know that we'll be able to edify each other as we comment together, as we learn together, as we teach together, knowing that the Holy Ghost can really enlighten all of us. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. Wonderful ideas, but you also know the level of education he's been able to attain.
Yes.
And it's not, I'm trying to hold that against him. It's just like here he is doing page after page, paragraph after paragraph of a time period of a situation that is so foreign to him.
Yes.
And it's just flowing out of his mouth.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for that wonderful comment. This is up there, please.
As I have studied history and I look at the life of George Washington, and he should have gone, as his older brother Lawrence wanted him to do, he should have gone to England to a finishing school. His mother said no and kept him at her knee, where he received a very Christian education. When I look at the life of Abraham Lincoln, who grew up in the backwoods of Kentucky barefoot, who had a very scanty education, except that which he primarily garnered for himself. Yes. And Washington becoming the president who established the nation, Lincoln becoming the president who preserved the nation.
Yes.
And then I look at Joseph Smith, who was to found the greatest church upon the face of the earth, with the best organization, with the restoration of all things that had ever been upon the earth in terms of the priesthood and the gospel. These men had to be pure and pliable, and there are others like them.
Yes.
They had to be fit for those stations in life. The Lord had to be able to use them and train them and teach them to perform their remarkable mission. And I'm not sure that an academic formal education would have produced the character the Lord needed to perform those missions on the earth.
Well, thank you so much. I love that. I love how we've been able to see this line of inspiration, clay in the potter's hands, because, as you said, they were pliable. Thank you. Thank you for that. What a great comment. I just want to testify that as we talk about so many different things today, that we can remember that Joseph Smith truly was what he said he was, that he was a prophet of God, that the Lord truly needed to restore prophets and apostles, prophetic revelation, priesthood and priesthood keys, a pure organization, pure ordinances, pure doctrine, pure scriptures. That those things he did through the prophet Joseph because he was pliable. Yes?
Well, forgive me for my ignorance or even my literalness here,
No.
but when it says he's sitting with his face buried in his hat with the stone in it, which is the year
Yes.
of Thumb, I never pictured that.
Yes, right.
So I pictured him pouring himself over the plate.
That's right.
So help me to...
Yes, exactly. Great question. So this is something that we've been able to find through these new sources, this exciting papers project, right, that the church is doing. Right, so notice, plates are on the table. This is obviously not, covered. The plates are covered on the table, okay? And here he is translating. You say, well, how are you translating something that you're not even looking at?
Yeah.
Well, it's because, once again, getting back to this revelatory experience the translation was for Joseph, right, he sat in the hat, as he said, right, or looked into the hat to block the light. Why? Because when he looked through this clear stone of the Urim and Thummim, or the seer stone that he had, he would see the words 20 or 30 at a time, and they would be in English. So he would look through the stone, and he would see the English words, wasn't even touching the plates. He was looking at revelation before his eyes. That's how he described it. That's how those around him verified the experience. Isn't that just fascinating to think? Once again, this is the type of thing that is so wonderful that we can know today, that we can read about, published, by the church. Here we've got this wonderful quote by Emma. Anyway, so.
And yet there are some accounts from Oliver Cowdery where it did sound like he actually was like...
Sure, of course, yes. And that's right. And what we're going to see here is Joseph. In fact, there were times where by the end of it, he said that think of these objects as training wheels for Joseph, because that's the way he talked about them. By the end, he could receive revelation, right? He could translate with even nothing before him, right? And so that's the thing. We see this prophet learning as he goes, being tutored as he goes, right? The Lord giving him line upon line, helping him the whole way through. So yes, there were definitely different ways at different times that Joseph experienced the revelatory process that translation was.
This is the more advanced part of the translating.
Or you could even say that perhaps, well, the looking in the hat, looking into, right, if he's using, right, one of the stones, that is perhaps actually a little closer to the beginning of the process. Because there would be a time where he would not even need the stone or the Urim and Thummim, right? And he would be able to have visions, he would be able to have revelations, he would know exactly the words of the Lord without even having an object, right, to look through. So yeah, but certainly all of it is amazing, right? And all of it, right, is by the gift and power of God. And that's the thing where, regardless of the details are nice, you know, but the bottom line is Joseph's testimony is that by the gift and power of God, he translated. So thank you for that. Now, as we remember Joseph having this gift and power of God, right, notice, as a prophet, it certainly did not mean that his life would be easy. In fact, 1834, this period in the journal that we're looking at now, really was a difficult time for Joseph. He's only 28 years old. He's only 28. Keep in mind, right? Think of a 28-year-old you know, right? And here he is. He's organizing the first High Council in Kirtland. We have Zion's Camp to help the Missouri states who've been expelled, right, from Jackson County. Now they're in Clay County. We're going to see this is going to be such a hard year for them. Joseph is thinking he's over 900 miles away. You know, how can I help them? I need to help them. Right? Finally, you know, they get there. We're talking more about Zion's Camp. They get there after the 900-mile march, and what happens? They turn around without even firing a shot in anger. We're going to see here, right? The redemption of Zion must wait. All that way. And of course, we'll talk more about it. But he received Section 105, talking about how they just were not ready yet. They were not ready, right? And remember, right, Zion cannot be built up unless there is a people prepared to live the laws of the celestial kingdom, right? And they weren't ready yet. And so all of that work, all of that time, all of that effort, right, it ended up being an incredibly important test, right, for the men who went. We'll talk about why. But they came back, right? And right while he's there, though, before they come back, right, Joseph is using his time wisely. He organized a high council in Missouri. Now notice, right, the Quorum of the 12 at this time, right, they're called in the scriptures a traveling high council, right? They had jurisdiction, right, over what the high councils that were sitting high councils didn't have, right? So the sitting high council in Kirtland, right, had jurisdiction over Kirtland. Right, the sitting high council in Missouri had jurisdiction over Missouri, but then regulating the affairs of the church abroad as missionary work scattered, saints that were elsewhere, right, that was the work of the 12. Right, a little bit different than today. But, right, notice, he's organizing the Missouri High Council, ordained David Whitmer, president of the church in Missouri. Notice, organization is slightly different than it is today. We don't have necessarily the president of the church, but think of it like a stake president, right, similar. Okay, then by December he's appointing Oliver and Hiram and then his father, Joseph the Senior, as assistant presidents of the church, right, and they're all in Kirtland. And so notice, this organization is being fleshed out. The church is growing. Converts are coming in. There's the spirit of gathering that's blessing the saints, but yet times are tough. And he's bouncing back and forth between these two church centers here. And this is quite a challenge organizationally. This isn't a click of a button, right? Because certainly today, I mean, your husband, I know, has worked remotely across miles and miles and miles, right? We have all sorts of people who, right, communicate with China and, you know, Pakistan or wherever it might be today, and it's not so big a deal. But think, this is Joseph on horseback. This is Joseph, right, before the telegraph, right? This is Joseph, okay, who has to try to manage two church centers on the back of a horse and through revelation. It's a big deal. Okay, and it was a tough task. Now, with all that said, okay, it's a big old deal, right? This really was tough for him. And we're going to see, though, there are other things that are hard because as he has these revelations poured out upon him, he is establishing all sorts of programs for the church that are helping people in so many different ways. Right? One of them, right, we know as the United Order. Right? It was originally called the United Firm. There was also a literary firm. You'll learn a little bit more about that. But I don't know if you picked up on this in the journals, right, for this week's class. Here we are in 1834, right? 7 through 9 April, Monday through Wednesday, and then the next day, the 10th of April, Thursday. We see that things aren't going well. Right? Let's take a look here and tell me a little bit about, right, the way Joseph is feeling about this United Firm here in 1834 in the spring. All right? We have bowed down before the Lord and prayed that he would furnish the means to deliver the firm from debt and be set at liberty. And then, welcome, what's your name?
Heidi Parker.
Hi, Heidi, nice to meet you. Brother Gentile, Mr. Gentile, nice to meet you. Had a council of the united firm at which it was agreed that the firm should be dissolved, and each one have their stewardship set off to them. This is only a few days' time here. What's going on? What do you see based on what you know, what you've read in the journals? Right, of course, I don't know if you delved a little bit deeper in your scriptures. Certainly you can do that later if you haven't already. But for more information just about the law of consecration and the vehicle by which it was administered, right, this united firm, as we know, the united order, right, take a look at Doctrine and Covenants 41, 2, 44, 51, 56, 70, 72, 78, 82, 83, 85, 104, 105. There's so much in the Doctrine and Covenants about this. It's unbelievable, right, the outpouring of revelation. The Lord spent so much time trying to establish this. So what would you reason then is going on here? The Lord has spent so much time trying to set this up, but what's going on now in 1834? Please.
I guess he's realizing they truly are not ready.
They're not ready.
And so
Okay, and
he's changed his course.
Now tell me, how do you know? Right, we have to read between the lines here, but what are some of the problems that you see?
They're in debt.
They're in debt. Now what does that mean? No, based on what you know about how it works, why would they be in debt? Tell me about that. What's happening in this give and take? How is it unbalanced?
They're taking more than they can.
They're taking more than they can give back. Okay, that's a problem, right? Now, how is it supposed to work? This is a mature group here, and I guess as you know perhaps a little bit about this, but how is it supposed to work? Anybody recall? Like I said, you probably read this before in the Doctrine and Covenants, Mr. Anderson.
I think they go and deed everything to the church and then receive back what they need according to their needs and their wants.
Yes.
I guess their needs and wants were exceeding what they were giving.
Great.
Overall, I assume. And there would be a deed given to them as well.
That's right.
To manage.
Private property.
Private property.
Right, private property still. Excellent. Great. Okay. Now, so like there's some bases. We'll look at a little more here in a moment. But certainly, as we can see, we've got debt here. Right. He's praying. He's bowing before the Lord. Right. That this whole process can be set at liberty. So here we have hope. And the day later, they get together. And what do they do? I don't know. By the way, how many of you, I'm just really curious, are reading in the paper copy versus the online copy of the journals? Just out of curiosity. Is anyone, and you don't need to be, but I'm just curious. If you're not, that's okay. And the reason why is, in the paper copy, there are footnotes that are incredibly helpful for this. If you look at those footnotes, what you're going to see is that at this time, saying that the united firm will be dissolved, right, is simply saying not that the entire operation is going to be completely dissolved, as in sent away and kaput, but we're going to see that it's going to be split into a Kirtland order or firm and then a Missouri order or firm, right? Because we're going to see that this idea of having them together was not working at all. We'll see eventually they would all sort of run their course, right, for the reasons that you mentioned. Okay, but let's just take a look here because I want to do some more reasoning and relating here. So this is from the papers. I'm not sure if you did anybody click on this, by the way. Certainly keyword searchable, but also hyperlink searchable. So as you're reading in the journals online and you come to a Google hyperlink, what you'll see is that it will take you to a paragraph like this. Incredibly helpful. I really recommend it. Right, so for example, here we go. A little bit of background. An organization that supervised the management of church enterprises properties from 1832 to 1834. In March and April 1832, Revelations directed that the church's publishing and mercantile endeavors be organized. In accordance with this direction, the united firm was established with 9 men acting as its officers and having responsibility for the church's storehouses, publications, and temple affairs. Additional officers were appointed later. The goal was to manage these enterprises in such a way as to generate funds that would become the common property of the whole church once the needs of those within the firm were met. The united firm had different subsets. Gilbert Whitney and Company managed the church storehouse in Independence, Missouri, right? Newell K. Whitney and Company managed the storehouse in Kirtland, Ohio. And the literary firm, right, which W.W. Phelps would have a large hand in, okay, in Missouri, managed the church's publishing endeavors. In addition to mercantile and publishing enterprises, officers of the United Firm supervised farms and residential real estate, an ashery to make potash, tannery, stone quarry, sawmill, brick kiln. Each property or enterprise under the United Firm supervision was owned by individuals rather than by the firm or by its officers as a group. And this is hugely important. People oftentimes mistake the Mormons and they lump them together with all these other communitarian, right, communistic, socialistic experiments of the 19th century. Oh yeah, the Mormons did that too. Well, they didn't. They really didn't. It is very important to see why they didn't and how they didn't. All right. Anyway, so right, this April 1834 revelation that you're looking at here, this council getting together, right? They directed that the United Firm in Kirtland be separated from that in Missouri. The revelation also called for a redistribution of the Kirtland Firm's assets to its officers, cancellation of all debts they owed each other. They're trying to start fresh. Can we just kind of forgive and forget and move on with the same system in place? Can we move on? In effect, this marked the end of the United Firm since its supervisory function was largely assumed by the Kirtland High Council thereafter, and we see that this is the beginning of the end. But, once again, they're still trying. Now, with that said, right, as you see the prophet trying to keep this going, notice this has come to him by revelation, right? Can you reason any principles that we can then relate? Because I think this is really important to see, right? Joseph is trying to help a sinking ship. We might feel like we have sinking ships in our lives of all sorts, financial, emotional, spiritual, physical, intellectual, whatever it might be. We have challenges. We know that. What can we reason and relate about what Joseph was trying to do here as we think about our own problems? Please, Mrs. Spain.
I'm thinking, sometimes the answer to our prayers is not now.
Yes.
And it's one of the hardest answers
Yes.
to grapple with. A yes,
Right.
a no is easier than a later.
Yes.
And I think that relates to this situation where, later.
Yes,
You
right.
know.
Certainly these principles,
preparation
right, will be
Yeah.
very important to us later.
Right.
But now, they're not ready. They're not ready yet.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. What else? Mrs. Updeck, please.
I think he realized it was a work in progress.
Yes, yes.
And that it required adjustments and simplifications.
Yes. How can we relate that to our lives?
Every day.
Aren't we all a work in progress? Wouldn't we all benefit from simplifying? Right.
Well, they did have the same goal in mind, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think they all had a desire to be out of debt.
Yes.
They all had a desire to do so in ways that would be in line with the law, and they all had a desire to not take advantage
Yes.
of the system,
Yes.
where it was going to a point where it was looking like that,
Right.
So their hearts were in the right place, but the methodology needed some adjusting.
Yes.
And I'm reminded of this with some good friends of mine who their business ventures were wholesome and good, but didn't go as planned. And they got $150,000 in debt, huge amount. Everyone thought that they would declare bankruptcy, and they did not want to do that. They wanted to pay all of their debtors back. Had no job, had nothing in mind, just turned everything to the Lord and said, we can't do it right now, but we want to do it. And they just did a lot of prayer and direction, a lot of hard work, and a lot of dedicating themselves to the Lord's will. And this last month, 5 years later, they just paid their last check of that $150,000 debt.
Wow.
So we also know in the church that they did get to a point where they paid off all their debt.
Yeah.
And they did get to a point where they knew that it was the right stewardship.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I love that. I have known personally people who have chosen to go the other route with that, saying, it would be too hard to pay off, our responsibilities, so we'll just declare bankruptcy and, just kind of go from there. And it's so interesting to see this struggle that your friends had to do what they felt was right, even though it was hard. It's taken 5 years, and here they are, right? But notice, right, what have they now experienced? They have been set at liberty. Liberty of the soul. You know what I mean? And what a blessing that is for them, to know that they've worked for it.
And to see all the blessings of the Lord in their life while
Yes.
they're trying to fulfill
Yes.
it. They saw the hand of God again and again with that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to invite all of us to once again take a look at our temporal affairs. Is there anything that we could do to be even more at liberty than we currently are? And the Lord knows that for each one of us. This isn't a time to share, but just an invitation to look at our temporal affairs and see if there's any way the Lord would have us be more free. Help us do it. So as we think then about this council to talk about, what can we do? Once again, let's simplify, but certainly same vision in mind. A great quote to help us continue relating here. So this is Elder Mary G. Romney. This is published in the Doctrine and Covenants Student Manual, the Institute Manual, 2002. But I know that this group probably is well aware. But I think especially for those who might be online, I know we have all ages and backgrounds here. But I think it's so important to note this very, very amazing organization that the Lord helped us to try to see if we could live it. He gave us the opportunity. This vehicle by which the law of consecration was administered for the years that it was, as few as they were, truly was remarkable for the principles behind it. And Elder Romney helps us to understand that. Take a look here. He gives us 5. The cornerstone of the United Order is belief in God and acceptance of Him as Lord of the earth and author of the United Order. Now take a look. He contrasts this with socialism throughout the entire thing. Right? Look at these people who say, oh yeah, this was just another communitarian experiment. Well, okay, socialism, wholly materialistic, is founded in the wisdom of men and not of God. Although all socialists may not be atheists, none of them in theory or practice seeks the Lord to establish His righteousness. That's the first one. Number 2, the United Order is implemented by voluntary free will actions of men, evidenced by a consecration of all their property to the Church of God. Socialism is implemented by external force, the power of the state. Number 3, the United Order is operated upon the principle of private ownership and individual management. Thus, in both implementation and ownership and management of property, the United Order preserves to men their God-given agency, while socialism deprives them of it. This is fantastic. This is one of my favorite all-time quotes to come back to. Really, I love this. The United Order is non-political. Socialism is political, both in theory and in practice. It is thus exposed to and riddled by the corruption that plagues and finally destroys all political governments that undertake to abridge man's agency. And then 5th and finally, a righteous people is a prerequisite to the United Order. Socialism argues that it as a system will eliminate the evils of the profit motive. The United Order exalts the poor and humbles the rich. In the process, both are sanctified. The poor, released from the bondage and humiliating limitations of poverty, are enabled as free men to rise to their full potential, both temporally and spiritually. The rich, by consecration and by imparting of their surplus for the benefit of the poor, not by constraint, but willingly, as an act of free will, evidence that charity for their fellow men characterized by Mormon as the pure love of Christ. And what a blessing. What a blessing to become like the Savior through this process. Wow. As you think about those 5 points, just tell me, how can we relate this to our lives today? There's so much. These principles need to be part of our lives in whatever way the Lord would have you implement them, but they need to be a part because these are righteous and true principles. So, how can we relate these principles to us today? Please, Mrs. Hanson.
The current name and title United Order scares a lot of people. So when reading this and realizing how Christian and gospel-based it is,
Yeah.
it takes a while for my mind and heart to realize the extreme difference, but with a similar title. So the way that many of the nations who are forgetting God, who are choosing to take God out of the government, out of especially our nation, who are choosing to go that direction, will have the things that he's talking about here happen on every level, on every point. And it is so important to understand, well, it's so difficult because there's like 1,000 things coming into my mind right now, but it's so important to remember that a government based on a virtuous and moral people will get the results of what he's talking about here for this form of the United Order. But if you take the Savior out, if you take charity out, if you take the motivations that are God, that are based on principles of on righteousness, then it will go the opposite direction every time.
Yes.
There is no other direction.
We see, right, the abridgment of agency, the force of the state, the slavery that comes. I mean, there's so much there. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else would like to add to that great comment? Please, Mrs.
I
Smith.
think it's a great reminder of how everything we've been given is given to us of God.
Yes.
And we get a little possessive.
Yeah.
And,
yes.
And with no right or reason to become possessive.
Yes.
And just in our generosity to others, not even physically, but just in our minds, we sometimes are not generous.
Yes.
Even if we don't have means to give, we don't have the mentality, I would if I could.
Right. Right.
Or we don't find a way to give up a want so that we can. I'm convinced everyone has something to give.
Sure.
And that was the sweetest story at regional conference about Sister Stephen's husband being a bishop. And
Yes.
I can't take it.
I can't take it. Sister, you need to learn about being a recipient, and all that. The humility.
The sweetest example. I thought she was living united for him.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I love that. And you know, it hurts me. It hurts me when I hear, and I know that no one means this, but when little kids say, oh, tithing, 10% of everything God gives us. How about like a trillionth of everything God gives us? You know what I mean? It's not 10% of what he gives us. I mean, you know what I mean? Not even close. And so I love that comment. We need to be so cognizant of how much he gives us. And then when he asks us through the Spirit, hey, why don't you bring a meal to a neighbor? Right? Well, it's my food. Well, is it really? Is it really your food?
Or they got themselves in that mess. Why
Thank
should I?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Please, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, this idea of the cornerstone, that point number one, is so powerful. An analogy that my sister shared with me was sharing the sharing of little fruit snacks with her children. Right? She's got a whole cupboard full of fruit snacks, and she gives her fruit snacks to her children. And then sometimes she'll ask them for one, and they're about 10 in a fruit snack pack, right? Almost like timing. Right? Can you give me, just one of your fruit snacks? And sometimes they will. Sometimes they're possessive, right? Depending on the mood, maybe. But just this idea that the Lord is the keeper of all the fruit snacks. He knows where all the fruit snacks are. So he can buy lots of fruit snacks.
Yes.
He can order them.
He doesn't need us to get fruit snacks.
Right? But and so we should just remember that, right? His cupboard is full. His pantry is full. It's more about us sharing and being willing in our dispositions than anything. Though, of course, certainly he uses it for the blessing of all around. So they're not our fruit snacks. He gave them to us. Let's just be generous with them.
I love that. What a great example, right? And I love what you said about just becoming, right? All of what God asks us to do is to help us attain the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. Going back to the last part, why is it such an amazing thing for the rich of this world to give to the poor of this world? Right? Because they gain the pure love of Christ. They put on themselves Christ, right? And charity suffereth long and is kind and envieth not and is not puffed up. Seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, and rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Who doesn't want those qualities? Right? What a blessing it is to be able to become, as God asks us to keep commandments. Yes.
When reading these 5 points, I can't help but think of the man that's sitting here right next to me, who has been blessed at different times of his life with the riches of the world, and at other times experiencing the other end. But never, whether he is in the times of poverty or richness, ever has he ever seen that he does not have something to give. And he's often around the poor. He's often around those that have much less than what we are experiencing here in our lives. And yet he finds ways to give to them, both spiritually and temporally, while still keeping their dignity, their pride. And he just, not too long ago, had a poor Mexican man that was sleeping on his floor with his shoes off, having hardly anything left on his feet that used to be socks. And the way that he brought it up to him was just say, hey, I need to go to Costco to get a few supplies. You want to come with me? And picking up some socks while he's there, and then them saying, hey, you can tell this so much better than me, Tracy. But basically the man was going to take one pair of socks out and give the rest back to Tracy. And he found a way, which he often does, to help them realize that, oh gosh, I just remembered, I have a whole package at home that I haven't even opened yet and stuff like that. And over and over and over, he has had his heart in that place, whether rich or poor, to give. And that's what we're talking about, is where the heart is.
Yes.
Where the heart is. And I had a hard time at first thinking of the rich of our world wanting to do that.
Right.
But as soon as that change of heart takes place, it would come naturally.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much for that. And Tracy, I'm just grateful that I was able to meet you today. Thank you for spending your time as the Savior spent his when he walked on this earth with those who needed some help.
I was just down in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico for a month. And while I was there, I met a fellow who was who had just been baptized a month earlier by the sister missionaries. And he was raised on the streets as an orphan, and into drugs, alcoholic, spent 8 years in prison, and then had spent the last 3 years sober and attending Alcoholics Anonymous. And after 3 years, that he said to his sponsor, he said, I still feel something missing. And he said, you need to find God. And he said, how? Where? Didn't know how to do that. So the next morning he got on his knees in prayer. And asked for that. And that afternoon the sister missionaries knocked on his door. And a month after he was baptized, he baptized his 8-year-old son. And his son asked me to say the prayer. The sisters asked him to find his program, and the first request was, who would you like to say the opening prayer? And he said, the gringo. And he'd only met me once. And his dad, before he was baptized, tried to teach him about the principle of tithing. And he said, okay, son, here's 50 pesos. You're supposed to spend 10%. This is an 8-year-old boy who's growing up in poverty. And he said, you're supposed to spend 10% of that, so that would be 5 pesos. And the son thought about it for a minute. And then he said, no, Dad. Let's give half. 25 pesos, 5 times the required amount. And after he was baptized, the bishop stood in front of him to welcome him as a new member and put out his hand to shake his hand, and instead of shaking the bishop's hand, he handed him his tithing envelope.
Wow. Thank you. Tracy, thank you so much for sharing those wonderful stories with us. Just so grateful that we have people here who are living what we're talking about today. Thank you all. Thank you. I love what Tracy said about prayer. We could talk about Zion's Camp, otherwise known as the Camp of Israel. But I think that today, why don't we go to a prophet's prayer instead? Look, it's in the journal. I don't know if you saw this, but for this week's reading, there was a really neat example to me of the kind of prayer that Tracy talked about, that this wonderful man offered, that brought the sister missionaries there that very day. Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery united in prayer to ask the Lord to send them financial help. And it was for the purchase of land in Jackson County, Missouri. This was Zion, and remember they were going to try to go down and reclaim it. But here we are in November, right? That had already fallen through. June 22nd is when they received that revelation, when Joseph receives it. Section 105 of the Doctrine and Covenants saying, right, the redemption of Zion needs to wait for a little season. That's when they call off the army endeavor, right? That expedition that they sent down there that we know as Zion's Camp or the Camp of Israel. So here he is in November. It's the fall, right? That's that kind of redemption is not right on the horizon right now. But Joseph is still working to help the saints in Missouri. He's praying for them. And on the 29th of November of 1834, he had received on the 28th of November, I'm not sure if you remember this, but he received $430. And just what a neat thing it was, this donation, and they were just so grateful, but they said, we need so much more. We need so much more. I'm here as a prophet praying to God. And I want you to take a look here. What would you reason and relate about how to pray from the way a prophet of God prays? Joseph said, and now, O Father, as thou didst prosper our father Jacob and bless him with protection and prosperity wherever he went, from the time he made a like covenant before and with thee, and as thou didst even the same night open the heavens unto him, and manifest great mercy and favor, and give him promises, so wilt thou do by us his sons. And as his blessings prevailed above the blessings of his progenitors, into the utmost bounds of the everlasting hills, even so may our blessings prevail like his, and may thy servants be preserved from the power and influence of wicked and unrighteous men. May every weapon formed against us fall upon the head of him who shall form it. May we be blessed with a name and a place among thy saints here and thy sanctified when they shall rest. Amen. Love that prayer. What would you reason and relate about how to pray from the prophet's example in 1834? Please.
I see from that he has obviously immersed himself in the scriptures, and he knows what he might ask for, because he knows his father loves all of his children, and he's saying, please, I know you blessed Jacob in this way. Could you please bless us in that way?
Thank you. I love that.
As your humble servant.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much for that. It's taken the time to know what the Lord has already done so that he can know what to ask for. I love that. What else do you see? What would you reason?
This church DVD video that's been distributed about John Tanner, Treasure in Heaven. And it profiles a powerful example of this same prayer.
Yeah.
The brethren were gathered and short of funds about building the Kirtland Temple, and it was about to be foreclosed upon. And so they bowed their heads in prayer. And John Tanner, back in New England, is inspired and prompted to go out to Kirtland, and he has the means to provide to prevent the temple from being and yet he then later becomes destitute himself. and goes on a mission. And I guess the prophet wrote out an IOU note saying that he owed him this money, and he ends up tearing it up.
Love that example. Thank you. What a wonderful example that is. Brother Tan, yes.
So I think if we reason that the Lord, what he says unto one, he says unto all, right? He oftentimes wants to give all that he hath to his children, right? He does. And certainly there are timing issues that sometimes are for our own good. He'll order all things for our good as fast as we are able to receive them and when we're able to receive them. But we can pray for every blessing with the assurance that eventually he will give it to us, right? He will.
Right.
He gives
all
unto all his children.
means all of the fruit snacks.
That's right. And all that he hath means all that he hath. And he promises us in the scriptures many times that he'll give unto the children of men according to their desires. So we should probably be careful what we desire, and we should also educate our desires well, because if we desire all things, we will be able to have them eventually. And we should pray for all things. He wants to give us all things. He says he will. So may our desires be righteous, and let's pray for it, and pray for it now. There's no reason why we have to say maybe 100 years or 1,000 years from now I'll be worthy of that. Pray for it now. It may take 1,000 years.
That's right.
But
You can start.
Start now.
Thank you. I love that comment. Thank you.
Well, along with what Leland was just saying, sometimes we feel like that's a blessing that's for someone else.
Right.
That's not
Right.
for me. Like that person deserves that kind of blessing more than I do. And we put ourselves down that way, or we think that we maybe even fear it. We maybe even fear a blessing. But I really like what Leland's saying, in a sense that we are all children of God. We have access to all blessings, and it's not according to any kind of presupposed class or person. And so we have to live worthy of them, but not to the point of worthiness that we might think has to be like this exalted worthiness. I think sometimes members of the church put themselves down and think that they're not worthy of certain things when really they are, just as a daughter or son of God. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And another wonderful comment. I love thinking about all of these great comments, and thinking about really everyone who's commented has talked in one way or another about the power of prayer. That this really is a power that if we're not tapping into it, we're only keeping ourselves from it in so many ways. And this is Elder Scott in 2007.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder.
It's just
Go ahead. Did you just read this?
Oh,
great.
God on prayer.
Oh, great. It's a great.
It's a regional conference.
Yes, right. And of course, and Elder Scott has talked so often about prayer, about how to obtain and recognize personal revelation. It's such a wonderful theme of his apostolic ministry. Thank you for pointing that out again. He said, I wonder if we can ever really fathom the immense power of prayer until we encounter an overpowering, urgent problem and realize that we are powerless to resolve it. Then we will turn to our Father in humble recognition of our total dependence on Him. It helps to find a secluded place where our feelings can be vocally expressed as long and as intensely as necessary. I have done that. Once I had an experience that caused me immense anxiety. It had nothing to do with disobedience or transgression, but with a vitally important human relationship. For some time, I poured my heart out. Thank you for your help. Were they able to hear all right from far?
So it took one or two times when we fixed it.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you.